Welcome to Thinking Aloud. I'm Michael Wilson. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to watch or to listen to this podcast on whatever streaming platform that you're on. We're currently in a series called The Journey of Following Jesus. And I put together this series a while back, and I've preached it in some churches because I wanted to look at what it looked like to follow Jesus in the 21st century. Most of the time, if you talk to churches about discipleship and how to become a disciple, what they'll usually do is put you through a class or give you some books to read. They'll give you information. But I believe discipleship is about transformation. Now, sometimes transformation can come through information, but not always. So what happens a lot of times is we tell people to read the Bible, but we don't tell them how to read the Bible. We tell people to pray, but we really don't show them how to pray or how to pray properly. And I was looking at discipleship in the 21st century, and I was asking the Lord, how do we follow you when we're at a disadvantage from the early disciples? His first disciples got to hang out with Jesus. They talked with him. They walked with him everywhere. They ate with him. They saw him laugh. They saw him cry. They were able to touch him and be a part of his life. You and I in the 21st century, we can't do that. Our relationship with Jesus is more on a metaphysical, a spiritual level. And while it's true that we can feel his presence, and I have felt his presence before, and he does talk with us, it is different than what the disciples had. And so I began to look at the ways that we could be disciples and how I could learn how to be a better disciple in the 21st century. And I come up with this series, and we've covered a couple of topics already. We've covered the topics of embracing the journey as the destination. In other words, that we're not trying to get somewhere, but it's the daily journey with Jesus that's actually the destination, that every day of walking with Jesus is the destination. Many people think that the idea of being a Christian is just so that you get to go to heaven when you die, but they don't think about living with Jesus and for Jesus every single day. The second episode, or the second part, was embracing the mystery of the journey, and how that following Jesus sometimes is like a mystery, because he doesn't tell us where we're going. He just simply tells us to follow him. And oftentimes that can be very mysterious. There's times when we'll ask God what he's doing and he won't tell us. All he'll say to us is, trust me. I've had moments in my life like that where the Lord was telling me to do something, and I was praying and asking God for directions. God, where are we going? How's this going to work out? And all he would say to me is, Michael, just trust me. Just follow me day by day, step by step. In this episode, we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics in this series, and that is embracing the discovery of the journey. Because discipleship with Jesus really is a discovery. It's a discovery of who Jesus is, and it's a discovery of who we are. And I want to unpack that and break that down a little bit. See, one of the main problems that I've had in my own life, and I'm sure that some of you can identify, is the fact that I was expecting God to follow me. So in my ministry, which God called me to do, that God says, I want you to be a minister for me. When I got really caught up in it, a lot of times I was going after the next big thing, the next church growth idea, the next thing that would draw people in, the next outreach idea, whatever. And I was always expecting God to bless what I was doing. But the problem is that Jesus asks us to follow him. It's not the other way around. He's not following me, I'm following him. And as a disciple, the thing that I have to learn the most is how to become more Christ-like, how to become more like Jesus in his character, his authority, and his nature. Now, when you read the New Testament, when you read the Gospels, we're not really told what Jesus looked like. We're not told what he ate, what he liked to eat. We're not told what made him laugh. We're not told a lot about the human Jesus, the man Jesus. We see what he did and we see the way that he treated people, but we're not really given any information about the clothes he wore, how he walked. And the reason I think that's important is, we could say, well, all Jewish people of that day wore this type of clothing or whatever. But here's what happens. A lot of times you take young ministers or young Christians and they're being mentored or discipled by somebody else. And this is really true of young ministers. And they start to emulate the actions of their pastor or the person that's discipling. I remember when I was younger, back in the mid 80s, so I'll date myself a little bit. I remember every Sunday we would watch Jimmy Swaggart. And I wanted to preach like Jimmy Swaggart. I wanted to be like Jimmy Swaggart. Now, I've known that I was going to be a preacher since I was 12 years old. And that's when I watched Jimmy Swaggart, that's who I wanted to be like. Because at that time, he was one of the biggest well-known preachers in America. Then when I got into my late teens and into my early 20s, I wanted to emulate Rod Parsley. Man, he could preach. And then I found out about T.D. Jakes, and I wanted to preach like T.D. Jakes. And so the thing that I had to do, though, was I had to realize I was not any of those men. And then when when I started working for the church that I eventually pastored, I tried to be like the pastor that was above me. And I even tried, when he turned the church over to me, I even tried to lead the church like he led it. But the problem with that, again, was that wasn't me. When I finally got comfortable in my own skin, when I finally got comfortable with who Michael was, and I decided that I was going to be the best Michael I could be, man, things began to turn around. Things began to happen. We began to grow in our church. But then there was a day when I remember the Lord said to me, he said, Michael, you know all about the principles about me. You know the stories. You know all of the stuff about me, but you don't know me as a person. And I remember it shook me to my core. Now, Jesus wasn't saying to me, Michael, you're not saved. You don't know me. But what he was saying was that I needed to get to know him as a person, because Jesus is a person. And not only is Jesus a person, but he's not a person that's just up in heaven watching down on us. Like many of us tend to look at Jesus in a very mystical way. Kind of like when we go to a funeral and it's Uncle Bob in the casket, and we're like, oh, I'm going to miss Uncle Bob, but I know he's up in heaven looking down on me, watching me. Well, many of us look at Jesus like that, but Jesus said, I will be with you always. I will never leave you nor forsake you. So Jesus is here right now in this moment. As you're watching this, as I'm speaking and doing this podcast, Jesus is here right now. But it's up to us to get to know him, to discover who Jesus is. And that's done in a number of ways. One, it's done as we get around other Christians who are further along the journey than we are. People that we know the Lord, people that we know who've been around him. Now, I'm not talking about just older Christians that's been at this for a long time. I'm talking about people that really know Jesus, and you can tell the difference. You can tell who is a cultural Christian or just a church-going Christian versus somebody that really spends time with the Lord, time in prayer, time in reading their Bibles. But again, we have to be careful even with that. And I'm not opposed to reading the Bible. Please don't hear me. That's not what I'm saying. But when I read the Bible, if the Holy Spirit doesn't breathe on it and reveal Jesus to me, then I'm simply going to read it and get my own interpretation out of it. So I have to be very careful that I'm not just reading the Bible and trying to figure out who Jesus is. It's a culmination of things. It's a culmination of being around other people. It's a culmination of reading good books. It's a culmination of, and probably the most important one, is spending time with Jesus in prayer, both talking to him and most more importantly, listening to him. And a lot of people struggle with that, and they're like, well, I just don't hear God speak. This is an area that I have struggled with most of my life. I've got friends that it seems like they have these ongoing conversations with Jesus. And I try that and it doesn't work. I don't hear God that way. God does speak to me, but it's in different ways than ways that he speaks to my friends. And God will speak to you in the way that he chooses to. But it's that in that speaking to you that you discover him. And that's part of the journey of following Jesus. Just like the disciples had to learn who Jesus was. And they, like us, had many, many, many misconceptions of who Jesus is. They wanted this warrior Messiah to come and deliver them from Rome and make Israel great again. They desired this king like David, and they desired to be part of his kingdom, part of his leadership. And yet Jesus did not do what they expected him to do. And many times in my journey of following Jesus, Jesus has not done what I thought he should do. He's not acted in the way that I thought he should act. And so I had to go back. I had to relearn. I had to ask him, say, Lord, I don't understand why you didn't do this. Help me understand who you are. So I mentioned the time when Jesus said to me, Michael, you don't know me as a person. I have spent from that time until now trying to get to know him as a person. Not just an entity, not just an idea, not just a mystical being up in heaven watching down, but a actual living being that is with me all the time. And that is part of discipleship, embracing the journey of discovering of who Jesus is. But just as important is learning to embrace and discover who we really are. I've been at this thing for a really long time, and one of the things that I have discovered, that I have learned, both in my own life and in the lives of other Christians, and really just the lives of most people, most of us live with masks on. Most of us are not living from our most authentic selves. Most of us are living from a fake sense of identity. That identity could be what you get from work. That identity could be just a mask that you hide behind because you've been hurt or traumatized. That mask could be a number of things. That mask could be a mask of acceptance, that you act this way around certain people to be accepted, but you're different at home or you're different with different groups of people. And one of the things that I had to come to realize in my own life was the number of masks that I was wearing. And the thing that I discovered through all that is this, that God will not deal with the fake you, because the fake you does not exist. God only deals with the real you. But in order to deal with the real you, Jesus has to take you on a discovery of who you really are. Most of us don't want to go that route because we don't necessarily like ourselves. We don't want to deal with the pain. We don't want to deal with the hurt. We don't want to deal with our traumas and our tragedies. But you have to take ownership for everything that's happened in your life. Now, that's different than taking blame. There's a lot of things that may have happened to you that weren't your fault, but they are now part of your story, and you have to take ownership of them. When I was studying this out and developing this series, I was thinking about Peter, because Peter was the one that told Jesus, "I'll go to death with you. I'll go all the way with you. I will die for you." That's what Peter really believed about himself. That was the mask that he was wearing, and he didn't even realize that he had this mask on. And Jesus told him, said, "Peter, before the rooster crows 3 times, you're going to deny me." And I don't know what went through Peter's mind at that point, but I'm sure he probably thought, ain't no way. I'll go all the way with you. As a matter of fact, in the Garden of Gethsemane, we see Peter pulling a sword out to defend Jesus. And he gets rebuked by Jesus and told to put the sword away. And yet, when Jesus was on trial, and Peter was accused of knowing Jesus, he denied him 3 times. Peter, the one that thought he would fight to the death for Jesus, ends up denying Jesus 3 times. He wasn't who he thought he was. He wasn't as strong as he thought he was. But the beautiful story in that, the beautiful ending, is that after Jesus is crucified, after Jesus has come back from the dead, he meets Peter and the disciples on the seashores. They're coming in from fishing, a night of fishing, and Jesus has fixed them breakfast. And Jesus looks at Peter after they had finished eating and says, Peter, he actually calls him Simon. Simon, do you love me? And in this, he uses the Greek word agape. Simon, do you love me unconditionally? And Simon says, he uses a different word for love. He says, Lord, you know I love you like a brother. And again, Jesus asked him, said, Simon, do you love me unconditionally? And Simon again responds by saying, Lord, you know I love you like a brother. It's 2 different types of love. Jesus is asking for a full-on, unconditional love commitment, and all Peter can give is, Lord, I love you like a brother. The 3rd time Jesus says, Peter, Simon, do you love me like a brother? And at this point, Simon is grieved because Jesus has asked him 3 times. Now, we're not told why Simon is grieved. I don't know if it's because Jesus asks him this question 3 times in front of the other disciples, or if it's the fact that Jesus is now coming down to Simon's level and asking him, more importantly, revealing to him that, yeah, Simon, I know you love me like a brother. I would love for you to love me unconditionally, but I will accept the fact that you love me like a brother. See, again, this was a discovery for Peter, because Peter thought he was one way, but Jesus revealed to him where he truly was. And I believe that's what Jesus does with every one of us. I believe that in order for us to be true disciples, we have to allow Jesus to help us discover who we are. And the only way that we can discover who we are is when we pull the masks off. But the second thing that I want to say about that, the journey of discovery, is this: that Jesus also reveals to us things that we don't, and we struggle to believe about ourselves. He changed Peter's name from Simon to Peter, the rock. See, I believe that Jesus sees stuff in ourselves that we don't see ourselves. In other words, that Jesus sees the best in us, and he's always calling forth the best out of us. That Jesus is always calling forth that which he has planted within us. I define discipleship like this these days. The discipleship is truly God helping you become the youest you that you can be. That you become the most authentic human by following Jesus. That as you follow Jesus, he always brings out the best in you, and that the best you always reflects Christ the best. That's what I want for my life. I want to know Jesus, but I also want to know the best version of Michael. Now, there's many people that can't handle that because you've been taught your whole life that there's nothing good in you, and that you have to constantly die to yourself, and that you're depraved and you have a sin nature and all of that. But I don't believe that. I believe that God cares about you and loves you and would rather die than be without you, which means you have worth, you have value. And I don't believe that God looks at you and just says, oh, you're so depraved and there's nothing good in you. I believe that God looks at you and he calls forth that which he dreams of you. That God looks in there in your heart and he says, man, I want you to see what I see. And then he begins to pull that out. That can only happen as you get to know Jesus. Because as you get to know Jesus and Jesus is in you, Jesus brings out the beauty that you are. Now, will he bring to surface the ugly parts of our life for us to deal with? Absolutely. But he always does it in a fatherly way. He always does it in a loving way, a caring way. He always does it to bring out the best in us, because the best you reflects the Father. The broken you doesn't reflect the Father because the Father's not broken. But when we get to that point of really living out our authentic selves, then we can truly say, I'm living out the image and the likeness of God. I hope this has helped you. I love this part of the series because it just means so much to me personally about the way that Jesus has revealed me to me, the things that he is showing me, the things I'm learning about him as a person. And it's just been wonderful. That night when Jesus said that to me, it literally changed the trajectory of my walk with him. It changed my life. It changed the way that I see discipleship. Now, for me, it's not just about gaining information, although I do love knowledge, I love to learn, but that's not to me what discipleship is. Discipleship is me becoming the best version of myself as I let Jesus be Jesus in me. It makes me a better person and it brings him more glory. If you're in the West Tennessee area, you can visit us at Renovatus Church. We're a church for misfits, dreamers, and the discontent. We're a church where it's a judgment-free zone where we are learning how to see God the way that God really wants to be seen, and that is Father, that God is better than we've ever dreamed him to be. And we meet on Sunday nights at 6 p.m. at 118 East Court Street, which is actually the home of the community church. We use their facilities on Sunday evening. For more information, you can visit our website at renovatus.org, or you can call the number there on the screen. I hope this has helped you. I hope this has at least given you something to think about, because that's what this show is all about. Thinking is allowed. And it's not for me to tell you what to think, but it's for me to give you things to think about and help you learn how to think, to know what you believe, more importantly, to know why you believe it. And I like to end every show with this. You were created by love, out of love, to be loved, and to love. So until next time, may God bless you abundantly, and may you know that you're loved and there's nothing you can do about it. God bless.